Hello everyone, this is Professor Gunner back with Natural and Artificial Environment. And today we're going to be continuing on by looking at some critiques of Western society, namely critiques of liberalism, but more specifically critiques that have been offered against capitalism, the kinds of things that capitalism does to us, the kinds of lives that it conditions. Recall that we've been looking at a few thinkers so far. Rousseau, who thought that the social institutions we created have corrupted us and are making us weaker and worse off. And Marx, who argued that our capitalist situation devalues workers, alienates them, turns them into commodities, makes them poorer in every sense of the word, and forces them to contribute to the creation of a world which further oppresses them. We talked extensively about Marx's theory of alienation and how alienation is a product of capitalism. Well, today we're going to be continuing on with that thread, and we're going to look at another critical theorist in addition to Fromm and Sensoy and D'Angelo, whom we've already looked at. Now, just a small caveat before we begin. When Marx was formulating his social and economic philosophies, certainly there were people who agreed with him. What we've been looking at so far, or most recently, is the critical theory school, which originated in the Frankfurt School, in the Weimar Republic, in Germany. These thinkers followed in the spirit of Marx's claims, but they thought that economic analysis was not the way to transform society. Rather, they thought that we had to seriously analyze and deconstruct the culture of these places if there was going to be some sort of anti-capitalist revolution. Well, one thing that I'd like to interject here is, since the publication of Marx's works, lots of people have disagreed with him. So this view that capitalism is inherently bad, that it produces alienation, that has been really bad in general for human life, is not something that has been accepted across the globe. For centuries now, there have been really important public thinkers and philosophers who have disagreed with Marx's claims. Nevertheless, we're going to continue to investigate today the Frankfurt School, and more specifically, one critical theorist in particular, Erich Fromm. Now, Erich Fromm is a thinker that I really like. I think his works are very interesting. But the important thing to note about him is that he is a critical theorist, and he was also partly inspired by psychoanalysis. So the works of Freud and Jung. What he sought to do in his philosophy was apply Marx's critique of economics to society and culture. And today what we're going to be looking at is a few passages from his book, Escape from Freedom, and his essay, The Present Human Condition, in which he tries to argue that humans in Western society generally have a false consciousness. That is, they don't really understand the situation they're in, and they are being transformed into consumerist automatons that don't feel or think for themselves. In addition, he's going to agree with Marx's claim that we in Western society are not living out our species being. That is, we are alienated from the process of labor, the products of our work, ourselves, and other people, failing to engage in productive, reflective work, making the world in our own image. To begin, I'd like to just offer you something of an overview of Fromm's philosophy and what he gets at in his book, Escape from Freedom. He notes at the beginning of this book that the Enlightenment period promised us something like a golden age of humanity that we would be able to usher in using science and reason in the scientific method. Thus, While Enlightenment advances in science, ethics, and politics promised us a better future, it has not really lived up to the hype. Why not? Well, in large part, that is due to the way that we have organized ourselves politically and economically. One of the big things that Fromm is going to make us aware of today is that this growing sense and saturation of freedom in our society, while it has allowed us to, generally speaking, pursue the kinds of lives that we want, it has also alienated us from those things that used to give human life meaning and purpose. And so in this book, he makes a distinction between freedom to do things and freedom from those bonds and meta-narratives that used to undergird and provide a sense of meaning and purpose and orientation to human life. He talks about this in Escape from Freedom on pages 50 to 53. Freedom from is not identical with positive freedom, with freedom to. The emergence of man from nature is a long drawn-out process. To a large extent, he remains tied to the world from which he emerged. He remains part of nature, the soil he lives on, the sun and moon and stars, the trees and flowers, the animals and the group of people with whom he is connected by the ties of blood. Primitive religions bear testimony to man's feeling of oneness with nature. Animate and inanimate nature are part of his human world, or, as one may also put it, he is still part of the natural world. The primary ties block his human development. They stand in the way of the development of his reason and his critical capacities. They let him recognize himself and others only through the medium of his or their participation in a clan, a social or religious community, and not as human beings. In other words, these primary ties block his development as a free, self-determining, productive individual. But although this is one aspect, there is another one. This identity with nature, clan, religion, gives the individual security. He belongs to, and is rooted in, a structuralized whole in which he has an unquestionable place. He may suffer from hunger or suppression, but he does not suffer from the worst of all pains, complete aloneness and doubt. We see that the process of growing human freedom has the same dialectic character that we have noticed in the process of individual growth. On the one hand, it is a process of growing strength and integration, mastery of nature, growing power of human reason, and growing solidarity with other human beings. But on the other hand, this growing individuation means growing isolation, insecurity, and thereby growing doubt concerning one's role in the universe, the meaning of one's life, and with all that, a growing feeling of one's own powerlessness and insignificance as an individual. If the process of the development of mankind had been harmonious, if it had followed a certain plan, then both sides of the development, the growing strength and the growing individuation, would have been exactly balanced. As it is, the history of mankind is one of conflict and strife. Each step in the direction of growing individuation threatened people with new insecurities. Primary bonds once severed cannot be mended. Once paradise is lost, man cannot return to it. There is only one possible, productive solution for the relationship of individualized man with the world: his active solidarity with all men, and his spontaneous activity, love, and work which unite him again with the world, not by primary ties, but as a free and independent individual. However, if the economic, social, and political conditions on which the whole process of human individuation depends do not offer a basis for the realization of individuality in the sense just mentioned, while at the same time people have lost those ties which gave them security, this lag makes freedom an unbearable burden. it then becomes identical with doubt, with a kind of life which lacks meaning and direction. Powerful tendencies arise to escape from this kind of freedom into submission or some kind of relationship to man and the world which promises relief from the uncertainty, even if it deprives the individual of his freedom. European and American history, since the end of the Middle Ages, is the history of the full emergence of the individual. It is a process which started in Italy in the Renaissance, and which only now seems to have come to a climax. It took over 400 years to break down the medieval world and to free people from the most apparent restraints. But while in many respects the individual has grown, has developed mentally and emotionally, and participates in cultural achievements in a degree unheard of before, the lag between freedom from and freedom to has grown too. The result of this disproportion between freedom from any tie and lack of possibilities for the positive realization of freedom and individuality has led in Europe to a panicky flight from freedom into new ties, or at least into complete indifference. And so what he's trying to get at here is, in the past, humans had these primary ties or bonds that provided them with security and orientation, meaning and purpose. We were a part of a cohesive family or clan. We all worshiped the same God or had the same religion. There was an understanding of what our social and political role was supposed to be, an understanding of what our familial role was. We believed in certain stories and mythologies, histories and traditions that we accepted and that helped orient us throughout our journey in human life. But, Fromm argues, what we have seen over the last few centuries is the emergence of the individual from these primary ties and bonds. Yes, we have become more free to do what we want, and that may be a good thing. But to those of us who have lost meaning and purpose and orientation, freedom is a burden. Thus, he would say, probably the majority of people in the Western world now have lost those primary bonds and ties, which, yes, did restrict them, but which also gave their life meaning, purpose, and direction. Not so anymore. And as a result of that, contemporary humanity in the Western world feels lost and confused, alienated and purposeless. Nowadays, the market, he's going to argue, unites mankind in the West, not tradition, religion, family, or the state. In essence, now human society today is based around mass production and consumption. Materialism governs our lives, and we judge our own lives and worth instrumentally by how much money we have, how famous we are, or what our economic status is. It wasn't always like this. People in the past did not care so much about what they had as much as we do nowadays, you might argue. Instead, they cared about their family. They cared about living up to God's plan. They cared about being a good Italian or an American or a member of their clan. But now that we are free from these primary ties, now that God is dead, in a sense, to quote Nietzsche, what we have found is economic concerns have filled the vacuum of religious, political, and individual concerns. As a result, we live in a society in which not only do we feel this existential dread, But as a result of our freedom, we may wish to submit ourselves once more to some sort of power, whether that is political or religious, in order that we might attain some security and orientation for ourselves. Our economic system, then, of mass production and consumption produces a certain kind of person. And it is required to produce a certain kind of person in order for it to work and for society to continue to function smoothly. He talks about this later in the book on page 276. The result of this kind of influence is a twofold one. One is of skepticism and the other of cynicism towards everything which is said or printed, while the other is a childish belief in anything that a person is told with authority. This combination of cynicism and naivete is very typical of the modern individual. Its essential result is to discourage him from doing his own thinking and deciding. Another way of paralyzing the ability to think critically is the destruction of any kind of structuralized picture of the world. Facts lose the specific quality which they can have only as parts of a structuralized whole, and retain merely an abstract, quantitative meaning. Each fact is just another fact, and all that matters is whether we know more or less. Radio, moving pictures, and newspapers have a devastating effect on this score. The announcement of the bombing of a city and the death of hundreds of people is shamelessly followed or interrupted by an advertisement for soap or wine. The same speaker, with the same suggestive, ingratiating, and authoritative voice, which he has just used to impress you with the seriousness of the political situation, impresses now upon his audience the merits of the particular brand of soap which pays for the news broadcast. Newsreels let pictures of torpedoed ships be followed by those of a fashion show. Newspapers tell us the trite thoughts or breakfast habits of a debutante, with the same space and seriousness they use for reporting events of scientific or artistic importance. Because of all this, we cease to be genuinely related to what we hear. We cease to be excited. Our emotions and our critical judgments become hampered. And eventually, our attitude to what is going on in the world assumes a quality of flatness and indifference. In the name of freedom, life loses all structure. It is composed of many little pieces, each separate from the other and lacking any sense as a whole. The individual is left alone with these pieces like a child with a puzzle. The difference, however, is that the child knows what a house is, and therefore can recognize the parts of the house in the little pieces he is playing with, whereas the adult does not see what the meaning of the whole, the pieces of which come into his hands. He is bewildered and afraid, and just goes on gazing at his little meaningless pieces. What has been said about the lack of originality in feeling and thinking holds true also of the act of willing in our society. To recognize this is particularly difficult. Modern man seems, if anything, to have too many wishes, and his only problem seems to be that, although he knows what he wants, he cannot have it. All our energy is spent for the purpose of getting what we want, and most people never question the premise of this activity, that they know their true wants. They do not stop to think whether the aims they are pursuing are something they themselves want. In school, they want to have good marks. As adults, they want to be more and more successful, to make more money, to have more prestige, to buy a better car, to go places, and so on. Yet when they do stop to think in the midst of all this frantic activity, this question may come to their minds. If I do get this new job, if I get this better car, if I can take this trip, what then? What is the use of it all? Is it really I who wants all this? Am I not running after some goal which is supposed to make me happy and which eludes me as soon as I have reached it? These questions, when they arise, are frightening, for they question the very basis on which man's whole activity is built, his knowledge of what he wants. People tend, therefore, to get rid of these as soon as possible. They feel that they have been bothered by these questions and thoughts because they were tired or depressed, and they go on in the pursuit of the aims which they believe are their own. Yet all this bespeaks a dim realization of the truth that modern man lives under the illusion that he knows what he wants, while he actually wants what he is supposed to want. In order to accept this, it is necessary to realize that to know what one really wants is not comparatively easy, as most people think, but one of the most difficult problems any human being has to solve. It is a task we frantically try to avoid by accepting ready-made goals, as though they were our own. Modern man is ready to take great risks when he tries to achieve his aims, which are supposed to be his, but he is deeply afraid of taking the risk and the responsibility of giving himself his own aims. Intense activity is often mistaken for evidence of self-determined action, although we know that it may well be no more spontaneous than the behavior of an actor or a person hypnotized. When the general plot of the play is handed out, each actor can act vigorously the role he is assigned, and even make up his lines and certain details of the action by himself. Yet he is only playing a role that has been handed over to him. The particular difficulty in recognizing to what extent our wishes, and our thoughts and feelings as well, are not really our own, but put into us from the outside, is closely linked up with the problem of authority and freedom. In the course of modern history, the authority of the church has been replaced by that of the state, and that of the state by that of conscience. And in our era, the latter has been replaced by the anonymous authority of common sense and public opinion as instruments of conformity. Because we have freed ourselves of the older, overt forms of authority, we do not see that we have become prey of a new kind of authority. We have become automatons who live under the illusion of being self-willing individuals. This illusion helps the individual to remain unaware of his insecurity. But this is all the help such an illusion can give. Basically, the self of the individual is weakened so that he feels powerless and extremely insecure. He lives in a world to which he has lost genuine relatedness, and in which everybody and everything has become instrumentalized, where he has become a part of the machine that his hands have built. He thinks, feels, and wills what he believes he is supposed to think, feel, and will. In this very process, he loses his self upon which all genuine security of a free individual must be built. The loss of the self has increased the necessity to conform, for it results in a profound doubt of one's own identity. If I am nothing but what I believe I am supposed to be, who am I? We have seen how the doubt about one's own self started with the breakdown of the medieval order, in which the individual had an unquestionable place in a fixed order. The identity of the individual has been a major problem of modern philosophy since Descartes. Today, we take for granted that we are we. Yet the doubt about ourselves still exists, or has even grown. In his plays, Pirandello has given expression to this feeling of modern man. He starts with the question, who am I? What proof have I for my own identity, other than the continuation of my physical self? His answer is not like Descartes', the affirmation of the individual self, but its denial. I have no identity. There is no self except the one which is the reflex of what others expect me to be. I am as you desire me. This loss of identity, then, makes it still more imperative to conform. It means that one can be sure of oneself only if one lives up to the expectations of others. If we do not live up to this picture, we not only risk disapproval and increased isolation, but we risk losing the identity of our personality, which means jeopardizing our sanity. By conforming with the expectations of others, by not being different, these doubts about one's own identity are silenced, and a certain security is gained. However, the price paid is high. Giving up spontaneity and individuality results in a thwarting of life. Psychologically, the automaton, while being alive biologically, is dead emotionally and mentally. While he goes through the motions of living, his life runs through his hands like sand. Behind a front of satisfaction and optimism, modern man is deeply unhappy. As a matter of fact, he is on the verge of desperation. He desperately clings to the notion of individuality. He wants to be different, and he has no greater recommendation of anything than that it is different. We are informed of the individual name of the railroad clerk we buy our tickets from. Handbags, playing cards, and portable radios are personalized by having the initials of the owner put on them. All this indicates the hunger for difference, and yet these are almost the last vestiges of individuality that are left. Modern man is starved for life, but since being an automaton, he cannot experience life in the sense of spontaneous activity. He takes as surrogate any kind of excitement and thrill. The thrill of drinking, of sports, of vicariously living the excitements of fictitious persons on the screen. What then is the meaning of freedom for modern man? He has become free from the external bonds that would prevent him from doing and thinking as he sees fit. He would be free to act according to his own will, if he knew what he wanted, thought, and felt. But he does not know. He conforms to anonymous authorities and adopts a self which is not his. The more he does this, the more powerless he feels, the more he is forced to conform. In spite of a veneer of optimism and initiative, modern man is overcome by a profound feeling of powerlessness, which makes him gaze toward approaching catastrophes as though he were paralyzed. Looked at superficially, people appear to function well enough in economic and social life. Yet it would be dangerous to overlook the deep-seated unhappiness behind that comforting veneer. If life loses its meaning because it is not lived, man becomes desperate. People do not die quietly from physical starvation. They do not die quietly from psychic starvation either. If we look only at the economic needs as far as the normal person is concerned, if we do not see the unconscious suffering of the average automatized person, then we fail to see the danger that threatens our culture from its human basis. The readiness to accept any ideology and any leader, if only he promises excitement and offers a political structure and symbols which allegedly give meaning and order to an individual's life. The despair of the human automaton is fertile soil for the political purposes of fascism. And thus Fromm is saying a lot of stuff there. But if we could boil it down to a few things, it would be this. We are starved in our lives for genuine meaning and purpose. We feel lost, insecure, anxious, and confused. To go along, to make sure that we don't run into any trouble, we conform. We conform to this economic system that we are a part of. We conform to our parents' expectations. We conform to what our political party wants us to vote for. We conform in our consumption habits. We conform in the music we listen to, in the books we read, in who we vote for, so on and so forth. We are living during a time in human history in which we have a great amount of freedom to do what we want, but we do not know ourselves. We do not truly know what we want, and we are afraid to risk anything to go for it. Thus, the kind of capitalist liberal system that we are living within has conditioned us to conform. The kinds of people it creates are people who will conform, consume, and not question or think for themselves. This is what Fromm calls an automaton. We think that we are free individuals doing what we want, being authentic, but we are basically just robots going through the motions. Cogs in this giant machine that we feel powerless to change or fix. Consequently, what his philosophy implies is that we humans in Western society are broken. We are alienated from our work, the products of our labor, ourselves, and others. And he has an amazing passage on this in his essay, The Present Human Condition. He says, and while I read this, think about your own experience. If this represents you. Man's character has been molded by the demands of the world he has built with his own hands. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the social character of the middle class showed strong exploitative and hoarding traits. This character was determined by the desire to exploit others and to save one's own earnings to make further profit from them. In the 20th century, man's character orientation shows considerable passivity and an identification with the values of the market. Contemporary man is certainly passive in most of his leisure time. He is the eternal consumer. He takes in drink, food, cigarettes, lectures, sites, books, movies. All are consumed, swallowed. The world is one great object for his appetite. A big bottle, a big apple, a big breast. Man has become the suckler, the eternally expectant, and the eternally disappointed. Insofar as modern man is not the consumer, he is the trader. Our economic system is centered in the function of the market as determining the value of all commodities and as the regulator of each one's share in the social product. Neither force nor tradition, as in previous periods of history, nor fraud nor trickery govern man's economic activities. He is free to produce and to sell. Market day is judgment day for the success of his efforts. Not only commodities are offered and sold on the market, labor has become a commodity sold on the labor market under the same conditions of fair competition. But the market system has reached out further than the economic sphere of commodities and labor. Man has transformed himself into a commodity, and he experiences life as capital to be invested profitably. If he succeeds in this, he is successful, and his life has meaning. If not, he is a failure. His value lies in his saleability, not in his human qualities of love and reason, nor in his artistic capacities. Hence, his sense of his own value depends on extraneous factors, his success, the judgment of others. Hence, he is dependent on these others, and his security lies in conformity and never being more than 2 feet away from the herd. However, it is not only the market that determines modern man's character. Another factor closely related to the market function is the mode of industrial production. Enterprises become bigger and bigger The number of people employed by these enterprises as workers or clerks grows incessantly. Ownership is separated from management, and the industrial giants are governed by a professional bureaucracy interested mainly in the smooth functioning and in the expansion of their enterprise, rather than in the personal greed for profit per se. What kind of man, then, does our society need in order to function smoothly? It needs men who cooperate easily in large groups, who want to consume more and more, and whose tastes are standardized and can be easily influenced and anticipated. It needs men who feel free and independent, not subject to any authority or principle or conscience, yet willing to be commanded, to do what is expected, to fit into the social machine without friction. Men who can be guided without force, led without leaders, be prompted without an aim, except the aim to be on the move, to function, to go ahead. This kind of man, modern industrialism has succeeded in producing. He is the automaton, the alienated man. He is alienated in the sense that his actions and his own forces have become estranged from him. They stand above him and against him, and rule him rather than being ruled by him. His life forces have shed themselves into things and institutions, and these things and institutions have become idols. They are experienced not as the result of man's own efforts, but as something apart from him, which he worships and to which he submits. Alienated man bows down before the work of his own hands. His idols represent his own life forces in an alienated form. Man experiences himself not as the active bearer of his own forces and riches, but as an impoverished thing, dependent on other things outside of himself, into which he has projected his living substance. And so, what is the state of contemporary human society? Well, Marx and Fromm are going to say it's one of alienation. It's one of conformity. It's one in which we feel free, but we are not actually free. Fromm goes on to say that we work and we consume and we keep busy so that we do not have to be with or know ourselves. We distract ourselves with food and drink, sex, drugs, alcohol, Netflix, Hulu. Why? Because we do not know ourselves. And it is uncomfortable sitting alone with our own thoughts. We are not an individual. Rather, we have been reduced in some sense to a cog in the machine, a member of the herd, a member of the group that is willing to be commanded, that is willing to be led, that is happy to just go along, go through the motions, and do what we're told. Our lives have lost their meaning and their purpose. And I think if you talk to your friends and family members, you might see an inkling of this. Do you feel fulfilled in your life? Do you feel like you are doing ultimately what you want to do? Or is your happiness and your life dependent on things outside of you? Oh, I need to make money. Oh, I need to live up to my parents' standards. Oh, I don't want my friend group to get mad at me. If these things are influencing the way that you live, well, you're just going along to get along, Fromm would say. Thus, Fromm argues that we no longer think for ourselves, have our own thoughts, nor are we authentic. He says, The meaninglessness and alienation of work result in a longing for complete laziness. Man hates his working life because it makes him feel like a prisoner and a fraud. His ideal becomes absolute laziness, in which he does not have to make a move, where everything proceeds according to the Kodak slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." This tendency is reinforced by the type of consumption necessary for the expansion of the inner market, leading to a principle which Huxley has very succinctly expressed in his Brave New World. One of the slogans which everyone is conditioned with from childhood in that book is, "Never put off till tomorrow the fun you can have today." If I do not postpone the satisfaction of my wish, and I am conditioned only to wish for what I can get, I have no conflicts, no doubts. No decision has to be made. I am never alone with myself because I am always busy, either working or having fun. I have no need to be aware of myself as myself because I am constantly absorbed with consuming. I am a system of desire and satisfactions. I have to work in order to fulfill my desires. And these very desires are constantly stimulated and directed by the economic machine. Thus, Fromm is going to say we live in a materialistic, consumeristic society in which real individuality and authenticity is lacking. He would encourage us to think hard about whether or not we are actually living the lives that we personally want to lead. When you reflect on your own life, can you see the truth in Fromm's words? When you are not in school studying or at work working, what is it that you want to do? Do you want to improve yourself? Do you want to paint a painting? Do you want to work on your business? No. You want to lay in your bed and consume. You want to be lazy. You are tired. I am tired. Everybody is tired. Thus, not only are we alienated from ourselves and others, Fromm would argue we have been gradually transformed into materialist, consumerist automatons. This is obviously not good for us. And if we take Fromm's argumentation to its conclusions, some scary things appear before us. We come to realize that our relationships in human life are transactional, not based purely on love and compassion. We have all the wealth and power in human history, with not the reason or wisdom to wield it. Down the pipe is coming social conflict, potential social collapse, economic downturns, environmental degradation, and possibly, if things get worse enough, the end of the world, either through nuclear annihilation or biowarfare, the spreading of disease. This is not a good situation to be in. Luckily, near the end of this essay, Fromm offers us a path forward, a path out of this materialist, consumerist, automaton life that we are all living. He says that if we want to change things, if we want to have hope for the future and to be able to tackle those problems that are coming down the pipe, we must transform ourselves in nearly every sphere of life. One of the things he advocates for is the decentralization of politics and economics. He thinks that rather than this liberal capitalist system that we have, some sort of democratic socialist society would be better. It would better meet people's needs and give us the energy and the freedom to individuate and live the kinds of lives that we want. He says that there needs to be a revitalization of culture and art, which has just, become an advertising and consumerist paradise. Where are all the great artists that are making bold claims? Or has art been consumed by advertising and, personally speaking, the drawings a 5-year-old could make? At bottom, if we want things to change, Fromm says that we each need to look inwardly into ourselves and work on our own individual growth and self-expression. We need to change the priorities in our own personal lives. We need to be willing to meet challenges. We cannot shy away from uncomfortability. We need to be honest with ourselves. We need to slowly start changing those habits and those thoughts that lead to this situation that we are in. And so that means getting better sleep, getting a better diet, getting exercise, conversing and being in community with others. And expressing ourselves in an open and honest way, rather than not expressing ourselves for fear of retaliation. In short, Fromm thinks that we need to take a step back from a lot of the systems and habits and activities that we are engaging in, because they are not serving us. I think we can all agree that there are problems with inequality. There are problems with our society, with our priorities, with our economy. And thus what Fromm offers is something like a human-centered approach, reorganizing all of these systems and structures around the basic needs of humans, psychologically and physically, and their activities. But this is not the only solution that thinkers have offered for some of the problems that face us. Fromm's path requires intense individuation, a lot of self-work, self-honesty. But some have argued that technology can solve many, if not most, of the problems of our age. Thus, where we have reached in the semester is another turning point. For the remainder of this unit, as we move forward, we're going to look at views on the purpose, nature, and value of technology. We're going to look at transhumanism, automation, and artificial intelligence. Some have argued that these things can be used to automate our labor so that people don't have to work, give ourselves more freedom, solve problems of economic inequality, provide education for people, and so on. So, since technology is here to stay, and it's going to continue to be a part of our lives, I think it would be a good idea that we reflect on what kind of relationship we want to have with it, and what kinds of problems it can solve for us, if any. So that is where we're going to turn next. I hope that you enjoyed this lecture, that you found it interesting and informative. If you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to email me. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Stay safe out there. Bye.